Sounds good. Well, we can get started. So this is Telecom User Group, and this is the 15 UTC or 8 a.m. Pacific time call that's going to be happening every other month. We're switching from the twice monthly to every other, well, to once a month, where the call time is going to switch monthly. So next month, same first Monday, will be the 11 a.m. UTC or 7 p.m. China Standard Time call. Same Zoom. There's a lot of subgroups and related collaboration with other groups, and we thought a once a month should be a good fit. If we want to increase the amount of times on this, we can look at that, revisit in the future. All right. Well, so right now we have two topics. I'm going to give an intro and a status update on the CNF Conformance, and then there's a discussion about management plane and installers for CNS, and how that's related to other topics, other groups and projects. I think we can provide access to these slides. So the CNF Conformance is a testing initiative in the CNCF, focusing on cloud native properties within a platform and the applications or CNFs that are running on a telco platform. And right now it's been focused on testing the CNFs. It will be focused on platform testing properties soon. Those are being defined. Some of the benefits, I think, overlap with other groups that we already think about. There's efficiency of using a cloud native platform and all of these things. The part to maybe point out that's a little bit different on the CNF Conformance versus some of the other groups is feedback for development, so that we can look at how to improve both the CNFs or the application development as well as the platforms, and getting feedback to that. And I'm going to skip past some of these things. So some definitions on this.
Hi, Dan Kahn just
Hey,
joined
Dan.
10 minutes late. I hope you saw my message, Taylor, and started
Yes.
without me. Okay, so my apologies for that, but welcome everybody to Telecom User Group. And Taylor, please keep going.
All right. So some definitions. We have a definition that we're following for the CNS, so the applications. And this has been shared with many of the groups. And this is based on the white papers around cloud native principles. What may not have been shared is the same focus from a platform side. So a lot of these principles you'll see on the CNTT, fault tolerances, declarative configuration, resiliency being a big one. So we're going to have the same sort of principles that we're looking at testing in the platform. So the plan, to go back where we were, is to help both the CNF developers to demonstrate conformance and implementation, as well as provide that feedback so that they can improve the software. And then ideally, operators can have test results that they can use when they're considering what software they want. This is going to be part of, I think, a multitude of testing when you're looking at the operators that they care about. And cloud native would be one of the aspects that will come into play. So the categories, right now this says workload, if you notice. The categories, what we're talking about here, should be covered and shared between both workload and platform. And these are groupings, these topics that allow us to discuss the different tests. Many of the tests are going to go across several categories. So one new category that we have that I need to add into these slides is resilience. So resilience is going to be part of configuration and lifecycle. It's also part of microservice if you look at how microservices run. So tests are going to go between those, but the categories allow us to talk about a set of tests, and that's what these are for. And then within those, you're going to have all of the tests are going to have certain properties that are related to either testing the principle that we care about from the cloud native aspect, and then what benefits and capability that you would see if it follows that. So everything's open source. This is on GitHub, and we're leveraging upstream tests and test suites, which gives us a possibility of integrating and working with other projects like OPNFV and OVP, which have different tooling, and allow us to contribute upstream any fixes that we may find. The framework itself does support both workload and platform, although most of the tests right now have been about the workload or testing specific CNS, but the framework we will be able to use to test platform, and there's going to be a lot of tests that require specific platforms, maybe for the applications or the workload to run. So we'll be able to see more of that as we go on. And then the instructions, so implementation and tying with the goals. So what we're looking at is something that a CNF developer specifically could quickly get going and use the software. So you should be able to follow the instructions and bring up the whole suite and start testing if an application that you're writing quickly, and test it in various environments is the goal there. And the test suite itself and the way that this is being run, we have all of the test suite running in a CI pipeline. And this is allowing us to more quickly iterate on tests, add new tests, hopefully start getting contributors externally to contribute. And we have all PRs and merges are tested in the CI so that we can validate if something changes and breaks, so that we can have more confidence in the test results and also speed up development. The scoring, so this goes back to not only feedback for the developers, but also the operators. It's very configurable. It's external to the tests themselves. It's a YAML configuration file that allows us to go in, and if we discuss a specific test that we may want to have a higher score, it's something that we say as a group, and this would be where we want collaboration from specifically operators, but CNF developers, vendors, and everybody as well. If a specific property or cloud native principle is a hard requirement, we could say this gets a higher score. So this is flexible, planned implementation, and this is where we are. So there's GitHub open source. If you haven't seen it yet, it's available. We have both static and runtime tests that are there, so we can actually test before you start running a workload on a platform. You can also deploy a workload and test that. There's a MVP set of workload tests that are complete and some that are in progress. We'll go back to that here in a minute. And we have a set of install instructions for both CNF developer that are pretty straightforward based on the snapshot releases. We also have more in-depth source code based installation instructions where you can build everything from scratch. Those are more in-depth if whether you're wanting to, you would just prefer that, or you're wanting to contribute as a test developer. And as far as the integration tests for what we're doing and what's running in CI, we have nearly full coverage for all of the testing and the framework itself. And then the initial scoring system. So here's a quick look at the MVP set of tests. So what we're looking at is the plan here is to have releases where we can say, here is what we have covered so far. We expect, based on feedback, to continue to add new tests, as well as to prioritize different aspects of the workload and platform that we would want to test. So this is an initial set that we've picked out based on ability to say, let's get these completed, and they should provide some feedback. And these are covering the different categories that we showed earlier. So microservice, compatibility doesn't have anything right now. Stateless though, security, scalability, etc. Resilience, these in yellow, these are the ones that are in progress and will be pretty soon. Some of these are leveraging the Litmus Chaos project, so upstream test, and there's all these others also leverage upstream tooling. So the next, whatever the version number here is, these are just examples. But the next set of tests, here's what we're looking at. And what I'm not showing here, these are all workload tests, but what's coming and we're planning right now, getting feedback and talking, following the CNTT efforts and other things, or what is the first set of platform tests. So we'll have something similar where we have, here's a list of MVP, the first set of tests that we want to cover from platform as well soon. There's a lot covered there. The next thing I'm going to get into is actually using this if you're interested. So I'm happy to stop if there's any questions more of the plan and where we are versus before I go into using this. And if Dan, you have anything that you want to add before I get into the usage?
No, I think one question that came up, and you might want to get to it later actually, is about the two sides of the test suite, where I think you've been focused mainly on the part that runs on the CNFs themselves, that looks at the artifact and confirms that it's acceptable. But I was hoping you could also describe the part that confirms that the platform is compliant and is built on top of the existing Kubernetes Conformance Suite.
Might be on mute.
Taylor, I don't think I threw you for a loop with that question, did I?
No, you didn't. I just realized I'm muted. So,
I'm glad you have heard of the two parts of the test suite, but I'm not.
Yes.
Just making this up.
I kind of jumped past this slide earlier, but this would address part of that. So the whole initiative for the CNF Conformance is based on the Kubernetes Conformance program, which is, you could really think two parts. So the Kubernetes Conformance program there's a certification piece that uses the test suite, and then there's the test suite itself. And that's primarily what you hear people refer to as Sonobuoy. And what you have is a subset of the very large, massive set of E2E tests in Kubernetes that are flagged as required for conformance. And then the Conformance Suite for Kubernetes runs and validates all the different platform pieces. And a lot of these have overlap into what CNF Conformance is going to require. And as part of the platform testing for CNF Conformance, we actually have wrapped and can run and will run the Sonobuoy Kubernetes Conformance against the platform that we're testing. and then we will have additional tests beyond that. So the very first thing that we want on any cloud native telecom platform is that's running Kubernetes, does it pass Kubernetes Conformance? That's the very first thing. So if you have a Kubernetes certified platform, then that means you should have already passed the Kubernetes Conformance. And then beyond that, we'll be looking at additional tests. Some of those may run from, say, the Kubernetes EDE test. There are EDE tests which cover some items that we care about and CNTT specifically cares about. There's a, in the platform requirements, where we can use a Kubernetes EDE test to validate some of those things. And then beyond that, there's many other tools and stuff that we want to pull together. So in the end, we're going to aggregate the Kubernetes Conformance and many other testing, and some may be written somewhat from scratch to cover those, so that we cover platform as well as workload. The workload is something beyond what Kubernetes does. Kubernetes is focused on the platform, and for the workload of that, you could think of these as more as cloud native applications that we're looking at. I think that answered what you were saying, Dan?
It did, thank you.
And I heard someone else a moment ago. Did someone else have a question or comment? Either one?
Hi, Taylor. Yeah, this is Saad from STC. I just have one observation, in this test plan, in the security, I think there is no enough cases, or I mean, security is not well addressed. Even I checked the Excel sheet which you shared last time, and there are very basic tests. So I don't know, I mean, what's the reason, and if we can include more, because I think is a more of a concern from many stakeholders around the containers workload security. Hello?
Yes, regarding security tests. So right now, as you see in the MVP set, there's only one test. This one is finished. This is does it run in privilege mode? This particular test is not just a pass fail, which I can get back to, but we do have a much larger list of tests that we're planning and ideas for tests. So if you have in the future, so we definitely want to expand on this. This set of tests is not comprehensive that I'm showing right now, and it's not saying these are the most important must-haves. What this is the list of them that we found do have value and could be done within a fixed amount of time. And then same for the next set. If you have specific security ones that you think would be high value and you would like to talk about some of those, whether they're platform or workload, then please let us know. We'd be happy to add. And we may have some that you're thinking of in a much larger list of tests. What we're trying to do is get this down to here's the first set that we're completing now, and then what is the next set that we're thinking about. The next set, potentially we could shift around if someone said, here's a security one, and it's something that is well defined, it doesn't have any blockers because of maybe there's some implementation that's not available yet. But if you have any thoughts on security or any other ones, then we'd be happy to hear them.
Oh, okay, makes sense. Thank you.
Yeah, to add a little bit to that as well, when the unprivileged bit gets you a long way in Kubernetes, and at least from the application and as a generic application running on Kubernetes, Kubernetes itself already has a large test suite in regards to what can an application do or not do. And of course, it doesn't cover anything about what the applications themselves. And so that that may be a gap that you may want to bring up and try to identify what type of things are you concerned about northbound of Kubernetes and northbound of the unprivileged bit that that is still a very open space. So that's I would definitely recommend collaborating with this group on those topics.
I'm not going to go through all of this, but just a quick overview. As part of working with CNTT and other groups, we started saying, what can we do to share the knowledge of the tests that we think are important from Cloud Native? So this particular one is looking at the CNTT reference architecture requirements, and then looking at the priority from a CNTT perspective, and then how is it a priority for testing, as in, is this related to Cloud Native? Is it out of scope? So some of these things, we're at least saying right now out of scope. We're not looking at testing IPsec acceleration, but others in here, which I'm not going to get into. This is a public document shared with CNTT, and it's in the TUG meeting notes. Some of them are related to security, and we have either pointed out potential tests and in the section marked CNF Conformance Notes. You can see this area. Or we may have mapped, which is another thing. Is this something that we see as covered by Kubernetes E2E or Kubernetes Conformance Test? So if there is anything, please let us know. We are looking at stuff. I think Falco, SysDig projects, and many other ones we're already starting to use and test. So we'll be going beyond the privilege mode. On the privilege mode itself, just one thing to point out that we're doing beyond simply testing, does it run in privilege mode or not? This particular test allows you to whitelist a pod. So if you said, we are okay with this single pod having privileged, all the rest of them in the workload that's running are unprivileged, but this one we know, that's one where we can allow it to pass. And then if there's a workload that you could build out the same implementation and have no privilege mode, maybe we give it more points. And then if you don't whitelist or anything else, maybe we give negative points. So this is going back a little bit to what I haven't got into, but the scoring itself, so the flexibility of that. There's going to be, I think, a lot of different paths on many of these. So one of the aspects on the security, the privilege mode is something, as Frederick said, you get a lot from that by covering privilege mode. What we need is help breaking down the higher level security. So if we say a topic that doesn't cover down to a pod, or is it something that we can do a pass-fail test on, we'd want to break down those topics. But if you have thoughts or you want to brainstorm on that, there's several places, including you can get on Slack, and you can reach out to us that way, the test bed, the GitHub repo, and other places. Are there any other questions before moving on to the using CNF Conformance Test Suite? All right. So there's several documentation that have been published. The place to get started first, I would say, is the CNF Developer Install and Usage Guide. This is all part of the This is published on GitHub, and there's much more extensive documents if you want to go into the usage beyond this. But this particular one has a more focused subset going over the prerequisites, the general setup and initialization of the suite, configuring a CNF that you want to test for these workload tests. This isn't platform testing yet. And then actually running and checking the results for the test. And beyond that, you can look at, I mentioned before, the source documentation, extensive usage documents for the individual test and the categories and other things, which there's links here. So one of the first places is how to configure and use that, and beyond the documentation itself, what you're going to end up with is you need some type of configuration file that's going to cover the suite, how it runs, as well as the workload that you're testing. This will continue to expand. Right now it's a pretty simple, straightforward CNF YAML file that covers all the different items, like whitelisting different pods, the deploy information, published Helm charts, and other things. And we have many examples, CNFs, that are upstream applications that we've tested. Those configuration files are in the repo, so you can look at those. So the general, I'm going to do a walkthrough. This is a general usage of if you want to test as a CNF developer. So this is, you have a application that you're providing some type of network services and you want to test that. The focus right now is on a single, you could think of it's the microservice or that single component in a full workload. We're slowly adding support for larger use cases or multiple CNFs, and maybe you call them service chains. Right now, the focus, though, is on that single pod or the application running, providing that microservice that you could build into a larger application and a full workload. So you need a platform that you're going to test on. And at the moment, for the workload testing, we have been able to support kind. So that's what we're showing right here. We also have tested and continue to test on bare metal clusters on Packet. So those seem fine. This is vanilla Kubernetes that we're showing right here. We're not using any additional add-ons or like CNIs or anything else, though we have tested with some like Multus and other things for testing some of the service chains, and we'll have more extensive examples later. But right now the focus and tying in with the MVP is a more simple, let's focus on a single pod and make sure that it follows cloud native principles. So if you have access to a cluster, what that means is you have your Kubernetes access information, and you've saved that to a file or somewhere where you can set your kubeconfig environment variable. And once you have that and you're able to access the Kubernetes cluster, then you should be good on the first requirement, just access to the cluster. This could be a self-hosted. Again, you could run kind. I don't see a problem right now running it against a cluster on a public cloud. In the future, when we do platform testing, we may want more extensive. The next is also pretty straightforward. We're publishing snapshot releases tied in with the passing CI builds. We'll eventually start having full beta releases and other things, and those are on the GitHub release page. And you can install a binary. Right now it's download the binary and make it executable. In the future, we'll possibly have some type of installers or create packages for different platforms, Ubuntu, CentOS, whatever else. Right now it's a binary. So what I didn't go over was the entire test suite compiles down to, the running part of the software compiles down to one binary. And this, you can go, and if you care about it, you want to get involved as a test developer, just interested, you can look at the language and other things behind this. But it compiles down to a binary. What we're releasing right now is AMD 64 static binaries to make sure that it should run on as many machines as possible that are AMD 64. And we'll look at providing binaries releases for other platforms based on interest and demand. So once you've downloaded that and made it executable, you can put that somewhere in your path, or you could run it from wherever you downloaded it. And the next step is, and I'm gonna see if I can click presenter mode. Let me know if this doesn't work for y'all. It should be a little bit more readable. So the next step is to initialize the actual Conformance Suite. This one right now, since we're in this pre-beta stage, you're seeing a lot of extra output. So what it's doing is making sure that it has all of the dependencies. It uses a lot of upstream software like Helm is shown there. It's downloading those, make sure that it has a version of kubectl that it expects and other things like that, and gets whatever other base configuration ready, including downloading the default published scoring template, which is on the repo. And then once that's ready, then you need some type of you need a configuration that covers the actual test run. And right now, again, this is focused on the CNF that you're going to test. So this example is using Core DNS. So Core DNS could be your DNS service that's part of your any workload, like the VCP use case has a DNS server, and this could be that. So you're going to configure that. This example is actually a few weeks old, so there's some more information that's going to be in there. And you're going to define all the different things like the chart repo that's you're pulling from. There's a published chart. There's many other things now in the configuration that's documented. But you're going to configure all of these, and then once that configuration file is ready, you will be ready to run the actual test. So the very first thing that we're doing right now that's about to be updated, there was a step where you would, if you're wanting to deploy the pod and the actual CNF, we support automatically deploying if it has a Helm chart. And you could run a setup command with the configuration file, and it will ensure it's in the test area, it's deployed to the cluster, everything looks good before you run the full test. This is about to be updated to be combined in the initial start to simplify this so that you can actually pass the configuration file, and this will all be handled. Now, if you want to deploy your CNF outside of this, there are ways to do that, but I'm giving you a walkthrough of the simplest path if you have a Helm deployable CNF. And once you have that, then you're going to run you can run individual tests, but what I'm showing here is how to run the full test suite. So a full test run is simply CNF Conformance all, or with the newest update, you would pass this and skip the last step for setup, and you will actually pass the configuration file. And then it will get everything set up and run all the different tests. And it'll give you the output of either it's passed or failed for every test on workload. We're going to see something similar for platform type tests. And then when that's complete, you're going to have some type of score. This is just an example down here, and the scores the points can be much higher, or they could be different things. But you'll have some score, and then if I can get my screen to the little slide thing. So the next part after that is everything is saved to an external file. So you have all the results as well as additional information in the results file, final score, scores for every test. And you can use that as input for whatever you want. You can read it directly. It's a YAML file that's readable. You could also use it to pull in and display in some fashion, or potentially integrate with some other test that's doing things beyond what the CNF conformance is. So a little bit more about the scoring itself. So all of the tests inside have individual pass-fail. Those are binary pass-fails. And then those roll up into scoring that we can say gives some type of range. And then eventually all of that goes up to the final sum for all of those individual and group scores, so that you have this final score of the total maximum points you could have had. And for say the most cloud native, that could be the full pass gold type standard. And then what score did you get? We have the capability in the scoring system to put weights on different tests. So you could say, if you don't pass a test, maybe we don't even care. Or maybe if you don't pass a test, then you're going to get negative points, and so on. Or you can get positive points. So we have that capability. This is a YAML configuration file for the scoring. It maps to each of the tests. You can say whether something is required, and ideally we get input from operators and CNF developers saying what they think is important, and then we can start putting more, adjusting the points to meet something. Of course, someone could take this, and if you said, maybe a particular operator says, we really care about one test even though no one else does, so we're going to make it required, that's totally fine as well. It's fully configurable. So we've been working with CNTT and trying to take requirements and stuff ongoing for the platform, helping with, one of the things would be the reference implementation. There's a lot of overlap into what we've been using. We've been using the CNF testbed framework for deploying clusters, the platform itself, to packet, so bare metal, and setting up networks on the fly. And so there's collaboration at that level. There's collaboration around the certification with the RC2, and then those gap analysis that we're doing with the requirements, like that spreadsheet. So I'm open for questions here, just showing this slide for those who haven't seen it. There is a CNF Conformance, and I've mentioned CNF Testbed Slack channel, as well as this TUG Slack. This is the CNCF Slack. And if you're interested, please join that.
Just want to say this is a great progress, Taylor. Thanks a lot for sharing it with us.
You're welcome, Robbie.
Hey, Taylor, can you paste the link to this presentation in the chat?
Sure.
Thank you.
And it's also on the, I don't think I pasted it in the right place. Yeah, I pasted it to the chat, and it's also on the meeting notes for the Telecom user group. So beyond this, and I'm happy to, if anyone has any questions and you're muted, please ask. I do want to point out that we are getting started on beta testing. And if you're interested in being a beta tester, then here's a Google form. Submit this. What we're looking at right now is testing specifically on the workload test, but one of the biggest focus that's going to help with platform and everything is feedback on setup and installation for usage of the suite, for getting the feedback from the suite. Does it look like it's going to be helpful for improving your CNFs as well as the platform? So if you're interested, you can submit on that Google form. All right, are there any questions? Otherwise, I'll hand it over. I know that we only have 10 minutes. Hopefully, Frederick, you can get some in.
Sure. So I'll make this quick, and we may need to continue the discussion at a later time. In terms of the context, to repeat it again, one of the things that we discovered when we were working on OVP phase 2 this morning was that there may be a gap that needs to be filled in terms of the management of CNFs. And so so OVP phase 2 itself is primarily in the business of consuming and credentialing, basically through verification of requirements, but they're not in the business of creating requirements. And so to give you an example, when you look at something like how do you install a CNF, like a lot of the discussions we've had around CNFs have been like, do they meet certain requirements in terms of like, do they require privileges? How can they scale horizontally, or happens if one of them fails, or so on. But in terms of, I don't know if there's anything that covers how do you actually install a CNF in a Kubernetes environment. So something that's a little bit more concrete. It's still a CNF even if it doesn't have such an installer, is my understanding. But at the same time, there's when it comes to actually credentialing these systems, then something needs to be defined there. So I wanted to bring up the concept of if the Telecom user group, or I want to ask a question, does the Telecom user group have anything around the management of the lifecycle of CNFs? And if not, would the Telecom user group be the appropriate place to host such requirements so that groups like OVP phase 2 can then consume them? So that's the question.
So this is Sukhdev. I would say yes. That's it seems like that should be the charter of this group, and we should take a shot at it.
Also, I came late, so I apologize. And this might have been covered in the initial parts, and this is definitely out of the scope of what was being shown for MVP, but I'm kind of just building upon what Frederick said. What about like, conformance stacks themselves? So like one of the issues I'm running into when I look at like deploying 5G in containers is vendors either want to bring their own stack so they can control the KPIs and SLAs, or they want some, really, really deep discussions on lines of demarcation between where does like support in for their app versus the platform, et cetera. They typically have strong opinions on what the infrastructure looks like. So would this eventually grow and evolve to where, beyond just a reference architecture, we have a conformant architecture, like here's the key KPIs you have to meet within your Kubernetes stack. And then you could take that to a vendor and say, look, I have a conformance stack. I shouldn't get too much grief on asking you to run your CNFs inside of my Kubernetes install.
Jeff, that latter vision is very much what we're trying to do here. And so our expectation is that if you are a telecom operator and you are running a conformant stack, and that can be a commercially provided one by a number of vendors, or the vanilla upstream version, or your own, modified version of the vanilla upstream, but that you can demonstrate that it passes our conformance, and you have a CNF that that also passes conformance, that those two things should run together, and that if they don't, it is a bug that maybe there is some interface that's not included in the conformance test. Maybe it's a process that we need to improve and change and such. But my perspective, at least, is that that's the whole thing we're doing here. That if we don't actually live up to that expectation, that we've just wasted years of effort. And unfortunately, I mean, I do want to be crystal clear that your concern is not an academic one. It is very much the case that in principle, these standards have enabled interoperability, and in reality, tons of operators have found that they've needed to take both their network functions and their platform from the same vendor in order to actually have it work well together.
Yeah, exactly, Dan. And like, a concrete example is, what if I want to put a third-party storage apparatus on there and it brings operators, and then my CNF has operators? How do I ensure that those operators coexist within, the management plane that Frederick was just bringing up, right? Like, there's all these like real world things that we don't capture when we're talking at the 10,000 foot view on actually making this stuff work. And, I'm trying to not relive 2010 when I try to put these things in my network, if you get my drift.
Yeah, so I think those kinds of real world conversations are exactly the things that we would love to do. And so even just opening up an issue to describe some of them in this CNF Conformance GitHub would be a place to start. I mean, storage, as is often the case, is sort of a special case. The Kubernetes absolutely does have this CSI API that does provide some level of abstraction, but I think we could agree it provides less abstraction, or allows more of the details to kind of filter through than some of the other APIs like CNI or the CRI. But CNI is another good example of that, where CNFs are going to need a way of being able to say that the network interface needs to provide at least these capabilities. But if they just say, yeah, I can only work with a CNI from Acme Corporation, and that CNI has to be the only CNI running on the platform, then the vendor has just succeeded in again doing a completely proprietary vertical stack again. So the expectation here is that we need to be defining the requirements in the way based on what the actual requirements are about latency or QoS or policy or other kinds of functionality, not to try and lock people in to a single vendor solution.
So
Taylor, do you want to add anything? Oh, go ahead.
I was going to ask, would opening up these type of questions in the CNF Conformance GitHub issues be the right place, and we can start discussing things like installers and other similar type of concerns that are on the management plane?
I think that's probably a good place, and then we can certainly move them to the mailing list or Slack if we find out having more general issues, or just have the next call, for example, focused on that.
Okay, makes sense.
Hey, Taylor, do you want us to put any metadata when we open up an issue? Because what I don't want to do is take away from all the fantastic work that's being done for the MVP and delay progress, chasing a bunch of rabbits down random holes. Do you want us to kind of put something in so that way we can kind of categorize these types of things, and so that we're not taking away from the work that's being done right now?
Yeah, that's a good idea. And there's multiple projects on the CNF Conformance, so having stuff associated with maybe a project that's more about ideas would work, and labeling them. So we've started doing that for some of the upcoming things like the beta testing and bugs and other stuff to separate it. Maybe at a higher level would be what is in scope. And I think with some of the things that you were referring to, like the KPIs and stuff, there's going to be some things where we can say, is the service provided in a cloud native way? And that seems in scope for CNF conformance. And then there's going to be requirements maybe for a specific operator or a larger group of operators that want something that's more of application specific functionality. And that's probably out of scope. How it's provided, is it provided in a cloud native way versus what is the actual functionality? And if we can figure that out, then we can see where they need to go. The Telecom user group repo and issues, maybe at the higher level, there was a comment earlier that these set of questions should be part of what the Telecom user group is discussing. I think that's true. So if we say, as a user group, as a group, developers and operators, what are the different things that we care about? Yes. And then what initiative should work on it? That's what's in scope. I think that needs to be defined. And from my view would be to not have one particular, one initiative cover all possible things. That we're not having the CNF Conformance actually build and write an installer. That's out of scope. We're not writing one from scratch. We're not writing our own Kubernetes test. We're leveraging. So I think that from an operator standpoint, what would be good for operators if the different groups come together and have well-defined interfaces so that they can provide you with the final results. So the platform test, the application test that are cloud native, that gives you one aspect, and you know that since it's our one main focus, that we're going to do that really well. And then we make sure that we can integrate with something else that you may say, we care about a standard for metrics, and we need that because we already have a massive set of applications that consume that. Those are good for you as an end user, the operator, but would be out of scope for any type of testing for the CNF conformance.
And I think to echo Taylor's point, we need to be very careful when we set requirements for. I think you mentioned, Jeff, demarcation point between what the application provides and what the infrastructure provides, and certainly within the CNTT, there's a lot of effort going around trying to define what is the responsibility from the infrastructure, what would be the demarcation point for the application. Now there are some requirements, some areas where CNTT are covering, but there are some areas which Frederick mentioned too, when it comes, for example, how do you actually deploy the CNF, and is there any requirement around that? And I think when we propose things, I think we need to be just very careful not to duplicate what has been defined CNTT to present the southbound of the stack, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I think you worded it quite well. Like, the litmus test that I have is, if Helm were to disappear tomorrow, would that change anything in Kubernetes core itself? And I sort of think of CNTT being similar. If Helm were to disappear, then what would change? And I think the answer would be, from the CNTT perspective, nothing. But from the CNF management and lifecycle, a lot could change. So we need to make sure that we capture those type of requirements somewhere. Also to help mitigate the risk in the future when Helm changes, when newer technologies come out, so that we can give guidance as things progress forward, because this is still a fast-moving space, and so we need to make sure that we have a handle on this stuff.
I'm going to bring up an example that's non-Helm. For those who haven't seen it, you'll probably seen it. So this Red Hat project, Turnadot, it's trying to do something that somewhat overlaps with Helm, but not completely, using Tosca. And to build on what you're saying, Frederick, what I would say is defining the requirements that we care about on the workload is more important than saying what a specific implementation is. So orchestrating and composing workloads, and then that sounds good. And then do we want it to be declarative? I think we do, a declarative type of language. Do you want policy-based service composition? I'm taking this from right here, but a lot of this you could put in any other tool. So if we can come up with the different names that we care about, then we can look at what tools are out there that implement those. We're already doing that from the platform side. So if we did it from the life cycle management of the CNS, if we do the same sort of thing, then we'll be able to go beyond whatever tooling is here now to what may come in the future. And it doesn't lock us in if there's new requirements that an operator wants that some other tool has, and it covers everything. So I think that could tie in, and that would help with scope as well. And in the end, what we have is on the CNF Conformance, what we care about is requirements that we want to check for on any implementation. And most of the time that shouldn't be checking that a specific tool is there, but saying that where application is being used, but instead, how does the application behave? And that way an operator could pick and choose from the vendors. Any vendor that follows those standards and meets those standards, then they should be able to use those. And ideally, interoperability would be part of that, which is going to be a combination of how the cloud native application, or a CNF, a cloud native network function, runs, as well as how the cloud native platform behaves. All right, we are over time. If we want to carry on this conversation, the Slack, CNCF Slack for TUG, as well as CNF Conformance would be one way if you want some type of live chats. Reach out. Jeffrey, you were asking about the issues and how to maybe label those on the CNF Conformance, and if you all are interested in that, feel free to reach out and we'll get some of those in place. And I think there's a spec board already, a spec project on the CNF Conformance, and something similar for the Telecom user group repo. And if you're interested in actually running the CNF Conformance, then feel free to follow those install guides and reach out with any questions. Reminder, next month's meeting is going to be at 11 UTC, which is 7 p.m. China Standard Time.
Thanks, Taylor. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, everyone. Cheers.
Thanks. Goodbye.